Barakata Yahweh, Barakata Yahushai, Bayishim, Rakah Kodash, Barakatum. First and foremost, I want to give all praises, glory, and infinite honors to Yahweh Bayishim Yahushai, double honors to the apostles and elders, a great millstone who ruled and teach well, and peace and salutations to Ya'akim out there pushing this word in truth and sincerity to the four corners of the globe. May you brothers endure until the end. This is the brother Ra'aya with another video, and I'm going to start it off in Daniel chapter 7 verse 19. Then I would know the truth of the fourth beast, which was diverse from all the others, exceeding dreadful, whose teeth were of iron and his nails of brass, which devoured, brake in pieces, and stamped the residue with his feet. And this is talking about those iron legs of the statue in King Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, the ancient pagan Roman Empire, verse 20, and of the 10 horns that were in his head, and of the other which came up, and before whom 3 fell, even of that horn that had eyes, and a mouth that spake very great things, whose look was more stout than his fellows. And now we're getting into the last leg of that fourth beast, those iron toes mixed with miry clay, the reincarnated Roman Empire, the NATO-EU alliance that the U.S. is a part of. And that little horn that had eyes and a mouth that spake very great things is the United States of America, which is also known as Babylon the Great in the scriptures. And those 3 that fell before it are England, France, and Spain, who are the main players in the New World before the 13 colonies took over North America and became the United States of America that you know today. And when we go into the Strong's definition for the word stout, it's Strong's H7229.
Strong's H7229.
Rav. Great, figurative of power. And when we go to the Gesenius' Hebrew Chaldee lexicon, it says great, to speak great things, i.e. to speak proudly, impiously. And when we go to the dictionary definition for the word pious, impious, it says lacking reverence, not pious, lacking due respect or dutifulness. And ever since the United States of America became a superpower after World War II, it's definitely lacked respect towards not only these third world nations and its enemies, but also its allies, especially in Western Europe. And these Western European Edomite nations are getting sick of America's proud and impious attitude towards it, which is why they're looking for alternatives when dealing with the U.S. militarily and economically. They're sick of feeling blowback from U.S. adventurism abroad, especially with the war in Syria and in Libya and in Afghanistan, which has led to the refugee crisis in Europe. And those Western European nations are still angry at the U.S. for the U.S. leaving the Iranian nuclear deal, which they wanted to keep together, because they know that if the deal falls apart, then that's going to lead towards a war with Iran, which the state of Israel and U.S. are going to start, and that they're going to get dragged into, which is going to happen. It's all a part of prophecy. It's all a part of the battle in the Valley of Jehoshaphat over in the Middle East, that war of Armageddon. And also the Europeans are sick of the U.S. meddling in its business and economic affairs, which is what we'll be dealing with in this video from RT America's YouTube channel titled Not Strategic for U.S. to Keep Making Enemies. And they have something called the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, which Western European nations like Germany are having a joint project with nations like Russia, so they can get cheap Russian gas to help heat Western Europe. But the U.S. doesn't want that to happen, not only because they're enemies with Russia, but because they want these European nations to buy their gas. And what this is all going to culminate into is these European nations turning against the U.S. and allying themselves with Russia. And together, along with other nations, they're going to shoot nuclear missiles onto the United States of America, which is going to turn it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then a desolate, uninhabitable wasteland afterwards.
And the U.S. Senate has approved new sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Germany and Russia, while only about 100 or so miles of pipeline are left to be built, next through Danish waters, which were actually suspended since December of 2019 due to U.S. sanctions targeting companies providing work to the project there. In a last-ditch effort, these new expanded sanctions are an attempt to thwart the business deal. The deal still needs to be approved by the House and get a signature from President Trump. But given the Trump administration's recent discord with Germany, the president is expected to sign on the dotted line. For more on this, we will go to former UK MP George Galloway. So, George, the U.S. appears to keep looking for ways to kill this pipeline in order to keep distance between the Germans and the Russians. Why?
Well, words like unlawful and in conflict with international law are merely polite ways of saying illegal. This is a blatantly illegal act that is being threatened, and not against Venezuela, not against Iran, but against the United States' closest allies in the world, in Western Europe.
And that little horn, whose look was more stout and impious than its fellows.
It cannot make sense strategically for the United States to be day after day after day making enemies of friends. We discussed just yesterday the ICC threat. There's the Paris Accords. There's the Iran nuclear deal. Almost without number, fights are being picked, not with traditional enemies, but with traditional allies. And it's partly, you ask why, it's partly to stymie Russian cooperation in Europe, not just with Germany, because this gas will heat the houses of people throughout Europe. But it's, as the German statesman just said, it's a shakedown, it's a Sopranos-style shakedown. Buy our freedom gas. Instead, that's what they're calling it. It's what Ted Cruz calls it. Our LPG. Liquid petroleum gas instead of that nasty Russian gas. It'll cost you more. It'll have to travel half the world to get to you, but it's freedom gas, if you know what I mean.
Well, George, it's,
Whose look was more stout than his fellows, lacking respect.
Good old American marketing, we'll call it that. President Trump has ramped up rhetoric against Germany in recent days as it pertains to NATO, you know that. And considering moving U.S. troops from bases there, how do you think the Germans are perceiving this sort of tough talk?
Well, here you see President Trump has a point. The United States is shouldering a far disproportionate amount of the financial lifting, the heavy lifting, and yet they're supposedly in Germany to defend Germany. Personally speaking, I want to see every last American soldier out of Europe, so I'm very happy about it. But Trump does have a point, that he's maintaining this very expensive military infrastructure in Europe, and the US taxpayer is having to pay for it, with the European taxpayer getting a cheap ride, if not a free ride.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump does have a point there, saying he criticized Angela Merkel for saying, they should pay up their NATO dues because the U.S. is shouldering this, but then they're going to go buy Russian Gazprom, is what he basically said. So how do you view Vladimir Putin's next steps here to expand Gazprom's reach into Europe?
Well, President Putin just has to sit back and enjoy it because there's no way that Germany will back down on this. There are far too many billions invested in this project. It's far too advantageous to the German and other European economies for the project to go ahead. The threat to governments as well as companies involved in the project is dark. But the threat to insurance companies is darker still, because Russia could build the whole pipeline if necessary. They don't need any Western engineering for 100 miles more of pipeline. But the danger is now in including insurance companies. And once the U.S. is threatening insurance companies, engineering companies, as well as all the other sanctions that they are throwing around like confetti, you've got to say this is all out of control, Manila. Unless, as I say, you really, as a country, want to lose all of your friends.
Well, George, the U.S. often talks about, the market deciding for itself. Isn't Nord Stream 2 self-evident of the market's demands?
Perfectly put, Manila. This is capitalism. The Germans want to buy Russian gas, not because it's wearing a fur hat and big boots, but because it's economically advantageous to them to do so. And that's what capitalism is supposed to stand for. People making efficient economic decisions in their own interest.
Absolutely. If you can get a cheaper deal, you go with that one. Simple as that. We'll leave it right there. George Galloway, always appreciate your take. Thank you.
And like I said earlier, all this going back and forth is eventually going to lead to America's European ally nations turning against her and allying themselves with Russia. This is Obadiah chapter 1. I'm going to start at verse 1. The vision of Obadiah. Thus saith the Lord Yahweh concerning Edom, you so-called white people. We have heard a rumor from Yahweh, and an ambassador is sent among the heathen. Arise ye, and let us rise up against her in battle. Now I'm going to jump down to verse 7. All the men of thy confederacy, or your allies, have brought thee even to the border. The men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee. They that eat thy bread, such as these Western European nations not having to pay the brunt of NATO's cost, have laid a wound under thee. While they're not paying the brunt of the cost for NATO, they're going behind the U.S.'s back and buying cheaper gas from Russia, the U.S.'s enemy. There is none understanding in him. And again, the men that were at peace with thee have deceived thee and prevailed against thee and laid a wound under thee. These European nations are going to turn against the U.S. and shoot their nuclear missiles onto the U.S. after they've allied themselves with Russia. This is Revelation chapter 17, verse 16. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, and the 10 horns are the EU, starting with the first 10 member nations of the European Union back when it was known as the European Economic Community, and the beast is NATO. These shall hate the whore, the United States of America, Babylon the Great, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire, that nuclear fire. This is Jeremiah chapter 50. I'm going to read verse 41 to 42. Behold, a people shall come from the north. And that's talking about the Russians, who are known as the North Country in the scriptures, as well as the spiritual Medes and Gog and Magog in Ezekiel chapter 38. And the reason the Russians are known as the North is because what's north of the United States and Canada across the Arctic Ocean? Russia, and a great nation. And many kings shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth, these other nations that are going to ally themselves with Russia to go against the U.S., not only Russia's allies, but again, the U.S.'s allies, which are going to betray her and lay that wound under her. They shall hold the bow and the lance. They are cruel and will not shew mercy. Their voice shall roar like the sea, and they shall ride upon horses, every one put in array like a man to the battle against thee, O daughter of Babylon, the virgin daughter of Babylon, Babylon the Great, the United States of America. And that bow and lance are symbolic for those nuclear-tipped ICBMs, because what you have to remember is that when the prophets saw these visions thousands of years ago, they didn't know what a modern-day nuclear missile was, so they had to describe it the best way they could with what they knew during their times, weapons of war like flying swords, bows and arrows, lances, etc., etc. This is Jeremiah chapter 50, verse 9, just to further reiterate Jeremiah 50, verse 41 to 42. For lo, I will raise the cause to come up against Babylon, the United States, an assembly of great nations from the north country. And that assembly of great nations, those kings from the coasts of the earth, are not only Russia's allies, like China, North Korea, and Iran, but the U.S.'s allies, which are going to turn against her: Germany, France, Britain, Japan, South Korea, Saudi Arabia, etc., etc. And they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken. Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man. None shall return in vain. And when those nuclear missiles hit the United States of America, it's going to turn it into the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, and then that desolate wasteland afterwards. I'm going to close it out in Isaiah chapter 13, verse 17 to 20. Behold, I will stir up the Medes against them, the north country, Russia, which shall not regard silver, and as for gold, they shall not delight in it. When the time comes for the Most High to put the spirit on Russia and these other nations to shoot their missiles onto the U.S., they're not going to have second thoughts about it. No nuclear weapons bans or nuclear weapons peace treaties are going to keep them from putting their finger on that red button. Their bows also shall dash the young men to pieces, and they shall have no pity on the fruit of the womb. Their eyes shall not spare children. And those bows are the silos that those nuclear missiles are going to come out of. And what do bows shoot? Arrows. Again, they shall hold the bow and the lance. Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man. None shall return in vain. And Babylon, the glory of kingdoms, the beauty of the Chaldees' excellency, shall be as when the Most High overthrew Sodom and Gomorrah. And besides being known as Babylon the Great in the scriptures, the United States of America is also known as spiritual Egypt and Sodom, as pursuant to Revelation 11 verse 8. And how did the Most High overthrow ancient Sodom and Gomorrah? With fire and brimstone from the sky. And he's going to overthrow this modern day Sodom and Gomorrah with modern fire and brimstone from the sky, those nuclear tipped ICBMs. And after those nuclear missiles hit the U.S., as it says in verse 20, it shall never be inhabited, neither shall it be dwelt in from generation to generation, neither shall the Arabian pitch tent there, neither shall the shepherds make their fold there. Not only is it going to be the biblical lake of fire from sea to shining sea, but that desolate and uninhabitable wasteland afterwards, a vast desert that's going to stand as a memorial as to what a wicked kingdom looks like and how not to govern the earth. So with this video, I hope you sincere Akim were edified. Just keep strong and keep pushing this word. We're almost out of this final wicked captivity of the heathens, chiefly Esau, Edom. And as always, I'm going to say Abad Babal, Kwam Yasharala, and until next time, Shalom.